You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. This episode is about the Camp Van Dorn Slaughter. So it's over to you now, Mark.
The Camp Van Dorn Slaughter was originally a racial hoax that was popularized in the self-published book in 1998 by Carol Case called The Slaughter, an American Atrocity. The case alleges that at least 1,200 African-American soldiers of the United States Army's 364th Infantry Regiment were killed by white American soldiers at Camp Van Dorn in the June of 1943. In Carol Case's book, more than two-thirds of it are acknowledged fiction. Part 1 of the book has 54 pages of purported history, and Part 2 has approximately 200 pages described by Carol Case himself as a fictionalized account of the alleged events at Camp Van Dorn. There has never been any hard evidence to support Carol Case's allegations, despite a year-long investigation by the Department of Defense, with most observers having dismissed his claim of any massacre. But the rumours of Camp Van Dorn Slaughter as being an actual event still persist even today. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this battle-conspiring episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes, a psychic medium, a ufologist and a true crime buff who loves a good mystery. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night I do a podcast on the various subjects under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and missing people. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this week's episode, I'm going to tell you about the true or false story surrounding the Camp Van Dorn Slaughter, and this week's necessary disclaimer. Now, although the bulk of this story could be either factual or rumour, it does contain recorded accounts of historical racism. And although I won't be using any racial slurs per se, I will be discussing cases of how racism affected people in the military during the 1940s and early 1950s. So you listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, at least once spoken, you can never tell whether I'm telling the truth or telling a lie, no matter how bad I pronounce the words. So, let's get back to the story. Camp Van Dorn was a former military installation in Centreville, Mississippi, with the U.S. Army acquiring 41,543 acres of land in both the Wilkinson and Amite countries. Do apologise. It was first established in 1942 during World War II, and the base itself was named after the Confederate General Earl Van Dorn, who came from Mississippi. Operating from 1942 until 1946, the area was primarily used to construct a camp for basic and advanced divisional infantry training, for which at the time it held up to 30,000 troops. Included with these 30,000 troops were 3,000 African Americans of the 364th Regiment, along with another 3,653 black troops, with the remainder of the troops at Camp Van Dorn being white. Camp Van Dorn operated up until 1946, after which it was declared surplus to government needs. And so in 1950 a certificate of clearance was issued. On a short but interesting side note, a certificate of clearance, or a land tax clearance certificate, confirms how much tax is secured by a charge on the land. Since it was cleared, most of the large property on Camp Van Dorn has been sold to a variety of landowners, and today the large property or area is used mostly for timberland and ranching, with potential for other developments. So, who was this Carol Case, the author of the book The Slaughter, an American Atrocity? To be honest, I couldn't find that much online about him, but this is what I did unearth. Mr. Carol Case was born on the 15th of March in 1939. He not only attended Brookhaven High School in Brookhaven, Mississippi, but he also attended the Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi, which is now a hotel called the Ole Miss Inn. Carol Case was the first Mississippi writer to have his short stories included in the prestigious de Grummond collection of children's literature. De Grummond's children's literature books are a collection of original materials supplemented by a book collection of more than 180,000 volumes of historical and contemporary children's literature dating from 1530. These books include fables, fairy tales, folklore, alphabet books, nursery rhymes, textbooks, religious books, moral tales, fantasy, fiction, primers, and children's magazines. Carol Case's stories about the Mississippi have also appeared in southern newspapers and magazines and have been filmed for national television audiences. He became interested in the story of the black soldiers in 1985 and has researched it thoroughly. Today, at the time of writing this show, he lives with his wife Suzanne in Macomb, Mississippi, and together they have 2 children called Christy and Rebecca, and works as a loan officer. Carol Case is an award-winning visual artist and freelance writer, with his drawings and paintings having been exhibited in many places. Eyewitnesses of the Camp Van Dorn massacre say they saw a mass killing with 1,000 African American soldiers being gunned down by the army in a racially motivated shootout in Mississippi in 1943. One white military policeman, after more than 40 years later, alleged, and I quote, "We had the whole area sealed off. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. We opened fire on everything that moved, shot into the barracks. We shot every Negro that moved. The screaming, yelling and begging, it was horrible." After this short break, in part 2, we will look at some of the racism that the 364th Infantry Regiment black soldiers at Camp Van Dorn endured, and the Thanksgiving Day riots of 1942.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99. to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Thanks for listening to Mark's Unexplained World. If you are interested in parapsychology, quantum sciences, and true encounters with the other side, you may wish to visit The Weird Walk Home. That's my show on YouTube. Also, stay tuned, because After Dark with Tilly and Mark is creeping your way in June. Additionally, if you are interested in weird sciences, you may like to purchase my brand new book on Amazon. That would be Weird Time by Tim R. Swartz. It features lots of strange explanations and encounters with time from myself and other notable names like Lon Strickler and more. Thanks for listening.
So, in 1943, were 1,400 African-American soldiers from the 364th Infantry Regiment actually executed at Camp Van Dorn during the height of World War II. Well, let's take a look at the whispered or alleged story centred around Centreville in Mississippi during World War II. Allegedly, members of the 364 Negro Infantry Regiment were killed at Camp Van Dorn to silence their relentless and sometimes violent demands for equality in the segregated army. On an interesting side note here, and one that I think I ought to point out, is that according to Wikipedia and Google, in the English language, the term Negro, or otherwise known as negress for a female, is a term historically used to refer to people of black African heritage. The term Negro itself actually means the colour black in the Spanish and Portuguese language. Some witnesses swear that they saw the shootout, and other witnesses swear that they only saw the shootout, but they also not only saw the shootout, but they also saw the events that led up to the shootout, including its aftermath. I do apologise.
Put your teeth in.
We got there, yeah. And some witnesses say that the casualties from the shootout were very high, while others say they were very low. And just to confuse matters a little, some witnesses lay claim that the whole thing is just hearsay. One of the things you have to remember is that this was way back in 1941, and the United States Army was a very different regiment than it is today. Most notably, back then, the segregation between black and white troops ran very deep, and the 364th Negro Infantry that was formed in 1941 was one of many all-black regiments in the Army. Originally founded at Camp Van Dorn in Louisiana, the 364th Infantry Regiment was mainly made up of soldiers from northern states like Chicago, Philadelphia and/or New York. The 364th Infantry Regiment was made up of primarily black soldiers, but ruled over by white officers. A common theme at the time was that these white officers had a bad reputation for constantly mistreating the black soldiers that were under them. One of the things that the white officers used to do that didn't help race relations was whenever the black soldiers tried to write letters to their congressmen or senators about their mistreatment, their white commanders would often intercept the complaints and make life even harder for them. So, of course, by the time the 364th Infantry Regiment was sent to Camp Florence near Phoenix in Arizona to guard over the German prisoners of war currently being held there, they already had a bad reputation for being troublemakers, and as postings go during wartime, by rights this particular posting should have been a cushy little number. But it didn't take long for the trouble in the ranks to start brewing. Due to the Jim Crow laws at the time, South America was deeply segregated. And on an interesting side bit, the Jim Crow laws were state and local laws introducing the southern United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that enforced racial segregation. The name Jim Crow being an uncomplimentary term for an African American. These laws remained in force until 1965. Formal and informal segregation policies were present in other areas of the United States as well, even as several states outside the South had banned discrimination in public accommodations and voting. Southern laws were enacted by white-dominated state legislators or redeemers to disenfranchise and remove political and economic gains made by African Americans during the Reconstruction era following the American Civil War. Phoenix's population at the time was around 7% black, and like other minorities, including Hispanics and Native Americans, they also had restricted daily lives and rights. This was something that the 364th Infantry Regiment black soldiers were not happy with. They were used to a slightly less institutionalised form of segregation back home in the north. So with that, and already being slightly pissed off about the abuse they were receiving from their own white officers, unrest was certainly starting to be felt within the ranks of the 364th Infantry. In the November of 1942, it was reported that an estimated 100 soldiers of the 364th Infantry Regiment were involved in the racial incident in Phoenix, otherwise known today as the Thanksgiving Day riot. It all started in a brawl that erupted in the black neighbourhood of the city of Phoenix, where many of the 364th Black Soldiers had gone to the bars. An expanding group reacted to a shooting and detention of some of their members by black military police officers from Camp Florence. So, as a form of revenge, this expanding group, who were now armed, decided to come back to the area. And as the confrontation spread between the 364th Infantry soldiers and the military police, other local civilian law enforcement then entered the battle. Civilians also started to become under attack after the military police, together with other law enforcement, blockaded a 28 block square area to capture soldiers who had fled into the civilian areas. In total, 3 people were documented as killed and 12 enlisted men were injured. The people that were killed included an officer, an enlisted man, and a civilian. There have been persistent claims that there were in fact more civilians that were killed in the Thanksgiving Day riot, which include attacks on other black neighbourhoods located in South Phoenix during an effort to round up the soldiers. Whilst in other areas of Phoenix, members of the 364 Regiment were also involved in other disruptive events. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at the punishment that the 364th Infantry Regiment Black Soldiers at Camp Van Dorn received, and further details of Carol Casey's book, The Slaughter, An American Atrocity.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
On the 26th of May in 1943, as a punishment for their involvement with the Thanksgiving Day riot while being stationed in Arizona, the 364th Infantry Regiment was sent to Camp Van Dorn near Centreville in Mississippi. Whilst there, the regiment continued to fight for equal treatment, and as a consequence of this, it became normal for anything between 65 to 85 men at any one time to be in the stockade for minor infractions. For example, one young man, a Mr. Francis Johnson of Chester, was locked up and at the same time was limited to bread and water to eat for just 2 weeks.
And what hideous crime did he commit?
I hear you ask.
Was it perjury? Murder? Assault and battery with a dangerous weapon?
No, it was none of those. It was, in fact, because he protested against one of the white officers kicking his wife. Within a few days, and after the 364th Infantry Regiment arrived at Camp Van Dorn, one of the unit's men, a Private William Waker, got into a brawl with the military police outside of the camp's entrance. From all accounts, Private William Waker was returning from a rest and recuperation break when the white military police decided to stop him at the gate and try to arrest him.
Why?
I hear you ask again. Well, it was because of his uniform. It was missing a button.
Really?
Yes, so naturally, like any normal human being, Private William Waker, seeing this as an obvious example of unfair treatment, resisted any arrest. So then the local sheriff, seeing the altercation, decided to step in and take some action.
And what did he do?
He shot Private William Waker. When Private William Waker's fellow soldiers had heard about what had happened to their colleague, they then decided to take some action themselves. They did this by breaking into the armoury, taking rifles and ammunition in order to prepare for revenge. Now, according to some reports, and what is known as the official report, all that happened is that a black military police riot squad was called out and fired shots into the crowd, and thus accidentally hitting one soldier in the leg. So, if one is to believe the official report of the Camp Van Dorn massacre, that was it. However, according to the lone officer Carol Case, who, if you remember, was the author of the book The Slaughter, an American Atrocity, that I talked about in the first part of this podcast, according to him, 1,200 members of the 364th Infantry Regiment were all lined up that day and shot by the white officers and civilians. He recorded his version of the events in his 1998 novel, the aforementioned The Slaughter, an American Atrocity. Carol Case also writes that as part of the alleged cover-up, most of the remaining 364th Infantry Regiment was then sent to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. There, the 364 Regiment allegedly overpowered several Japanese army attacks at the Amchitka Island. On an interesting side note, the Aleutian Islands are a chain of 14 larger volcanic islands and 55 smaller ones. Most of the Aleutian Islands belong to the US state of Alaska, with the islands forming part of the Aleutian Arc of the Northern Pacific Ocean. They occupy a land area that extends westward from the Alaskan Peninsula mainland in the direction of the Kamchatka Peninsula and acts as a border between the Bering Sea to the north and the Pacific Ocean to the south. From 1965 to 1971, as part of the Vela Uniform Program, the US conducted underground tests of nuclear weapons on Amchitka Island, where the final detonation was the largest underground nuclear explosion by the United States. Other members of the 364th Infantry Regiment, according to Carol Case's book, 300 soldiers were allegedly believed to have been transferred to other units, and by 1945 the 364th Regiment had been completely disbanded. If the Camp Van Dorn Slaughter did actually happen the way Carol Case has recorded it in his book, then it would be one of the worst, if not the worst, racial atrocity in US history. Now, just to be honest and upfront with you here, listeners, I have never actually read Carol Case's book, The Slaughter, an American Atrocity, so my opinions are purely based on what I have researched online. And from what I can see, Carol Case's book is divided into two parts. The first part, which is about 54 pages long, claims to be historical fact and backs up this claim by featuring some historical documentation. And part 2 of the book, which has approximately 200 pages, is an openly fictional account of the events that Carol Case claims happened that day. So, although the book itself is probably a cracking read, the main problem is there is hardly any evidence that this massacre even happened in the first place. Which of course makes Carol Case's book a complete work of fiction. Well, almost anyway. From what I have found out, the idea that this massacre happened in the first place is based on the accounts of 2 residents and a soldier, all who claim to have witnessed the atrocity. However, on closer inspection, I found that the records for this soldier show that not only was he not stationed at Camp Van Dorn at the time of the alleged massacre, but he actually died long before Carol Case ever released his book. And, unfortunately, the one thing that Carol Case would need to give his claim some weight, he doesn't have. And that is any accounts from any members of the 364th Infantry Regiment soldiers, or any accounts from the 30,000 odd soldiers stationed at the camp at that time. And, on top of that, no one, including man or beast, has ever come forward to back up his assertion. Sometime after Carol Case's book was published, his claims of the Camp Van Dorn Slaughter did actually start to receive some national attention. So the National Minority Military Museum Foundation decided to start up an investigation. On an interesting side note, the National Minority Military Museum Foundation, or now known as the National Museum of the United States Army, is the official museum for the history of the United States Army and is based just outside Washington, D.C. It opened its doors on the 11th of November 2020. The objectives of the museum are to honour American soldiers, preserve Army history and educate the public about the Army's role throughout time. The main building is approximately 185,000 square feet and displays selections from the United States Army Center of Military History. Outside this facility is a park with gardens and a parade ground, with space included to accommodate ceremonies, reenactments, lectures, educational programs, and reunions. After the National Minority Military Museum Foundation did some investigating, they quickly found that Carol Case's claims in his book had no historical documentation, so therefore deemed his book as a hoax. Also, at the request of both a representative, a Mr. Beanie Thompson, who was a Democrat from Mississippi, and the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, or the NAACP for short, the Department of Defence conducted a more than year-long investigation of the 364th Regiment and the alleged slaughter. And in 1999, the findings by the Department of Defence backed up the findings of the Military Museum Foundation, concluding that Carol Casey's allegations in his book were without merit, saying that no hard evidence of the alleged massacre had been found. And Mr. William E. Leftwich III, who was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Equal Opportunity, said the book was a, and I quote, "a work of fiction and a marketing grab." An army report entitled A Historical Analysis of the 364th Infantry in World War II was released on the 23rd of December 1999. It noted that, and I quote,
"All of the nearly 4,000 men who were assigned to the 364th in 1943 have been traced to their separation from military service."
Also, the military's subsequent report pointed out that, and again I quote,
"All of the nearly 4,000 men who were assigned to the 364th in 1943 have been traced to their separation from military service."
Of course, this isn't to say that nothing bad ever happened to the 364th Regiment at the Camp Van Dorn military installation in Centreville, Mississippi. And although the investigations into the alleged slaughter that were made by both the National Minority Military Museum Foundation and the Department of Defense found no evidence of a massacre, they did find some pretty disturbing stuff. For example, they found plenty of evidence regarding the cruel and terrible punishments that had been put upon the black soldiers in the regiment, along with plenty of racist and unfair treatment that was being carried out by its white officers. And it was also noted that whenever things started to heat up, or if there were any rumbles or rumours of a rebellion from the black soldiers starting, the army simply shipped the regiment off to a new posting where the cruel treatment would start up again. I feel it's only fair to say here that the US Army, for its part, has consistently denied that the Camp Van Dorn Slaughter ever happened. I suppose there's only one thing that puzzles me slightly about all this. Now, I'm not a military man by any means, and my military history isn't the best. But I did find out during my research that between the June of 1943 and 1945, when Camp Van Dorn was disbanded, I found that over 800 names had mysteriously vanished from its regimental roster. Now, like I say, I don't fully understand how things like a regimental roster work, but 800 names? Isn't that quite a lot of soldiers to lose? Did something happen?
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 103, we are going to be looking at the evil delusions of Eleanor Williams. Eleanor Williams is an English criminal who made false claims of multiple serious crimes, including accusations of trafficking, rape, blackmail, and physical violence, none of which were found to have occurred. Following her 2022 trial, Williams was found guilty on 9 counts of perverting the course of justice contrary to English common law. She was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. The fictitious claims spread by Williams on the internet had lasting impacts, including multiple attempted suicides, a rise in racially motivated violence, and the creation of the Online Safety Act in 2023, which criminalises the spread of false, harmful information online.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations of all the names, as usual, were all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes, Denise Poolar and Tilly Treadwell from the Weird Walk Home podcast. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening to any of the podcast listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by this basic copyright of Mark the Medium.